board member of Christians for Peace in El Salvador. It is in this role for 9 years that I had the pleasure to get to know our 2023 Peter Hinde Peace Award. Out of curiosity, who here has made their introduction to CRISPAZ through a delegation to El Salvador? Was this your introduction? You want to look around? These were introductions to CRISPAZ? Wow, thank you, CRISPAZ. I'm also one of them. I also was introduced to CRISPAZ 15 years ago by saying yes to an invitation to participate with an El Salvador encounter. I was in awe of the vibrant culture and spectacular flora and fauna El Salvador offered. However, it was difficult to process the evident economic disparity and devastation from war. CRISPAZ is a shining star. The organization embraces practices of nonviolence, community building, transforming conflict, and fostering justice. Tonight, we gather to recognize Paul Nitter and Cathy Cornell for their adherence to nonviolent resistance and the accompaniment of the people of El Salvador. Before we begin, I would like to recognize a few key people that are in this room tonight. I'd like to recognize our musicians here. Oh, it looks like we're sitting over here. We have Joy Patel, Bob O'Brien, and CRISPAZ Vice Chair, Kate Carter. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize a few of the background, these are CRISPAZ staff members. Raphael is over here standing, Raphael. We got Andy, who was instrumental. Andy, where's Andy? And we have two more here, but we'll introduce them later in the program. I'd also like to acknowledge the current
It's wonderful to be here and to see so many people coming out to honor Paul and Cathy. On behalf of Xavier University, and especially the Department of Theology and the Dorothy Day Center for Faith and Justice here at the university, it's really my honor to formally welcome all of you to this evening's Peter Hinde CRISPAZ Peace Award in honor of Paul and Cathy for their years of tireless efforts to promote peace in El Salvador and to advance social justice for refugees and the poor. As Ann mentioned, I'm a professor of theology. I'm actually in my last semester here, and that's something to be happy about. Paul and I have known each other for a long time. Paul began his career here at Xavier in 1975. I came in 1983. In over roughly 20 years together, we were not only colleagues, but became good friends and even publishing collaborators. The introductory text in theology that we co-authored with Brennan Hill is still in print 25 years later. And my wife pointed out to me it's actually in the shelf over there. Cathy is an alumna of Xavier as well, having earned both her bachelor degree and her master's degree here at the university. So it's really wonderful to have this connection. The appropriateness of this space is not only because of the connection that Paul and Cathy have to Xavier University, but also because of the actions that have earned them this award reflect values that animate Xavier, especially our Jesuit values of solidarity and kinship, and service rooted in justice and love. My dear friends, Cathy and Paul have certainly embodied these values. Before we enter into this celebration, let us call to mind the urgent need for justice and peace in our broken and suffering world. May I ask that you take a moment to center yourselves. Although we may differ because of our beliefs, our religious or non-religious convictions, I trust that all of us gathered this evening to honor Paul and Cathy share a common commitment to justice and peace. As may be appropriate for you, let your spirit be joined to the following prayers, first in a Buddhist form and then in a Christian form, to heal our broken world. All beings who everywhere are afflicted by sufferings of body and mind, may they recover quickly from their illnesses. May all frightened beings be relieved of their fear and let their inner courage emerge from within. And those who are prisoners because of themselves or because of others, may they be set free. May the powerless find strength, and may all people be on friendly terms with one another. May all those who find themselves in wild, lost, and fearful places, children, the elderly, the defenseless, may they be protected by the benign forces of the universe and quickly reach full awakening. Good and gracious God, we pray for the power to be gentle, the strength to be forgiving, the patience to be understanding, and the endurance to accept the consequences of holding on to what we believe to be right. May we put our trust in the power of good to overcome evil, and the power of love to overcome hatred. We pray for the vision to see and the faith to believe in a world emancipated from violence, a new world where fear shall no longer lead men or women to commit injustice, nor selfishness make them bring suffering to others. Help us to devote our whole life and thought and energy to the task of making peace, praying always for the inspiration and the power to fulfill the definite destiny for which we and all men and women were created. May Paul and Cathy be richly blessed for their long service to peace, justice, and the good of all.
Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with everyone here this evening. As a Salvadoran, seeing so many faces that are interested in El Salvador, have been interested in El Salvador, it's really moving. And I want to thank you for those who have been in El Salvador and those who continue to come and to be walking with us. It's really. I had no remarks prepared for this, but the opening and just seeing so many faces and people who stood up, I'm really grateful. I want to just share a little bit about CRISPAZ. We started obviously talking about something that happened in the 80s. A lot of people that come to El Salvador know about the war and about what happened, obviously the years before that. And I want to show you a little bit of where we are today as you look at the images. We were founded in 1984. We were founded by religious individuals. A Carmelite priest who unfortunately is no longer with us, passed away in 2020 because of COVID complications. But a Carmelite priest, a Lutheran pastor, and a Quaker peace activist founded CRISPAZ. It sounds like the beginning of the joke, but this is how CRISPAZ was founded in 1984. And it came out of a conversation that these individuals had with many farmers, many peasants, many Salvadoran members in communities that were in the rural area. And one of the things that kept on coming back was accompaniment, accompany us. And that has various layers, but I just want to point out two layers that became very present in the beginning of CRISPAZ. One of them was humanizing what was happening, making sure that we were removing the political conversations that were being had around the consequences of being at a war. And we wanted to make sure that people understood who was being affected by the war. So many people from the U.S. began to come out of that. The second aspect of this is a spiritual part that is deeply connected to accompaniment. And it happened in a relationship where many individuals in El Salvador were being persecuted. It wasn't just that they were being pushed around or asked to stop participating. These people were fleeing their places of livelihood, their communities, because their lives were at risk. So there was a invisible or visible policy by the government to violently eradicate these individuals. So the way that they lived their lives, knowing that their existence was not important, and that individuals in higher positions would say that what they were going through was not true, and when they would be heard, that it was not true, that they were lying. The fact that people were in front of them saying, I hear you, I see you, and this truth is now part of who I am as an individual. That part was instrumental in accompaniment in the beginning stages of CRISPAZ, which is another layer to accompaniment. But in general, accompaniment has many layers, but I just wanted to point these two out to you. In the 1980s and 85, more or less, the first delegation came down to El Salvador. And one of the most remarkable things about those groups that came during the 80s was that they were using their U.S. citizenship as currency to protect life. They went into these communities and really became human shields. It wasn't in the red tape, and it wasn't until they were there that they were told that they signed up knowing that this is what they were coming to do. So this is how pretty much the 80s came about. Honestly, Cathy and Paul got involved in the 80s, early in the 80s, and we're doing a lot of that. Sanctuary movements came out of that. A lot of people were ignited and came back and joined sanctuary movements. Others began sanctuary movements in their communities. So we're very grateful as Salvadorans for that. In the 90s, specifically 1992, the peace accords were signed, and anyone who understands a little bit about life and politics and just society in general understands that no signing of a document can bring peace to a country. So we did have the ceasefire. That was a very effective ceasefire, but we had two components that were not present in our society after the peace accords were signed. And any society that aspires to live in peace must have these two elements in play, and they're undebatable. One of them is justice, and in my opinion, more importantly, is truth. And these were unfortunately absent as we were trying to build this new El Salvador. And we went through the 90s trying to understand what CRISPAZ was about, what we should be about. And as we were doing this, issues continued to be present. The individuals from communities that we accompanied continued to live the types of realities that they lived. And privatization initiatives began to be spoken about. They became a reality. We had dollarization in 2001. We had the free trade agreement in 2001. All these issues created another push for Salvadorans and Central Americans to leave El Salvador and come up to the U.S. So CRISPAZ has been accompanying all these different issues, providing opportunities so our resources can be used by different organizations that promote labor rights, women's rights, climate rights, migrant rights. And as we are looking at where we're at today, we can look back at our experience and understand that we are an organization that is Salvadoran, but also partly present in the U.S. And our experience has been one of accompanying a people, a country that went through a war. And looking at the issue of nonviolence with that perspective is something that gives us a unique opportunity.
Hello, Paul and Cathy. Congratulations on your award from CRISPAZ. You have spoken so often and so warmly about this work that you do with CRISPAZ that I feel like I know what it's all about. In any case, after so many years of service, you are now being recognized for your contribution to the goals and works of CRISPAZ. So on this rainy afternoon in New York, I certainly wish I was with you, more for the warmth of your celebration than from a relief from autumn in a New York or temperate climate. Actually, Central Park is just getting dressed up for the autumn season, and you should be here to see that, which is wonderful. So may your evening be splendid. May you renew old friends and warm acquaintances and have a great time while you're there. And let me just add to you my congratulations and my warm and fond good wishes. Be well.
Cathy, me siento privilegiada. Para mí conocerle a usted y a su maravilloso esposo Pablo es y será para siempre un regalo de Dios en mi vida. El legado que cada uno de ustedes han entregado a mi país, El Salvador, es inmensamente grande. Parte de este legado ha sido su trabajo con CRISPAZ y especialmente el suyo, Cathy, como presidenta de la Junta. Cuando les digo esto, pienso en el lindo y profundo amor que hay en mis padres. Ellos, al igual que ustedes, se complementan el uno para el otro. Efectivamente, con su testimonio me han escrito muchísimas páginas. Y es por eso que hoy quiero decirles, felicidades, queridos amigos, y sigan siendo artesanos de paz en el mundo con su ejemplo. Felicidades, los quiero mucho.
How do I see Cathy and Paul? I've always loved the image of the long-distance runner, and that's what they've been in their relationship with El Salvador. They go way back, and they're with us still. I wanted to say something about Paul as a teacher. For many years, I taught a course here in El Salvador on the country's civil war, and the highlight of the course was the week we'd spent on the last chapter of Paul's book, Without Buddha, I Could Not Be a Christian. Paul was a guest speaker every semester, in person or by Skype, and he got us thinking in ways we hadn't thought before about how to be peacemakers and how to work for justice. He told us that the way we'd been doing things had been called into question by Buddhists who did things differently. It was very challenging, and I love the way Paul acknowledged that it had been challenging for him too. For me, it was life-changing, and I'm very grateful for it. And so that you can see for yourselves what this is all about, next week I'm going to make that chapter available to you. You can get it from Francisco or from me. And I just want to say to Paul, thanks very much for all you did over all those years for my students and for me. And to Cathy and Paul, I say, congratulations on receiving the CRISPAZ Peace Award. You very much deserve it.
Cathy and Paul, here are some words about your legacy as it lives in each of us. Stop often. Pay attention to interconnectedness within ourselves, within others, within God, within everything. Notice pain. Breathe. Meditate. Be in this world with all its injustices. Accompany those who flee, those who seek freedom. Participate in reform. Note the power of interbeing as you care for others. Never give up on the power of peace, its possibilities. In fact, be peace. Confront evil actively, everywhere. Build bridges. Live with compassion. Share it. Value the wisdom of people who are poor and beyond boundaries. Teach. Dialogue. Participate in stopping those who kill. Realize your oneness with them. Insist on joy in spite of tragedy and suffering. Love. Dance. This world requires it. Thank you, Cathy and Paul. We believe differently. We see beyond borders, and we act more courageously because you have been living among us. Congratulations on the Peter Hinde CRISPAZ Award for Peace.
I wasn't prepared for that outpouring of love. Wow, the words were, I felt it. But there's no one who has a better witness of someone's character than their family. I'd like to invite John DeGain and Lauren Knitter, please come forward.
This is a bit of a surprise. They weren't expecting me to be here. So, my name is Moira Knitter, and I'm the daughter of Paul and Cathy. Thank you so much for coming tonight to celebrate our parents and all the work that they have done for CRISPAZ. They have truly been an inspiration. Their advocacy work started in the early 80s with the sanctuary movement to help bring aid and safe haven to refugees from Central America fleeing civil conflict. They got me involved at a very young age, and I will be forever grateful for the spirit of activism that they have given me. Because of this, I have always wanted and needed to stand in solidarity with those who have not benefited from the privileges that I've had. I remember going to protests with my mom, singing songs, and even being photographed for the Cincinnati paper. As a mom of a 4-year-old, I can fully appreciate the effort it took to take a young kid to a protest. But I also see the other side of wearing out a kid by marching and singing in a circle. Our parents instilled such a passion in us for what was happening in El Salvador. We helped in preparing medicines to send, we made friends with the families that came to Cincinnati, and we truly believed in creating change. At the age of 8, I wrote a letter to President Reagan to tell him to stop funding the School of the Americas and stop funding the El Salvadoran military. In response, I got a signed photo and stopped letter. I was thoroughly disappointed. Their work with CRISPAZ has continued to inspire me to be involved with social activism. 30 years ago, I was one of the founding members of the first high school gay straight alliance in the state of Ohio. And continued on to be a founding member right here at Xavier University of our GSA. Nice. able to sign in favor of us having a group. And we fought, and we won. And both groups are still going strong to this day. So not many people can say that they started their activism at such a young age, and this didn't stop after college. I live in a very activist mindset, where many don't, especially in the corporate world, where it is just easier to keep your head down and keep moving forward. Before diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging became a common phrase, I pushed many an envelope to bring these exact values into each workplace that I was in. I have been an integral part of the Gorilla Glue Diversity Committee, where I've been for 10 years, working directly with leadership to create a safe and equitable workplace for all people, but specifically in the LGBTQ+ community. As my wife and I raise our daughter, with another on the way, we focus on making sure that she is taught about equality, equity, and taking care of those around her. We want to continue to teach her the lessons that were instilled upon me and my brother, so that she can also be a change maker. Thank you again for coming tonight and celebrating the work of CRISPAZ and the many years that our mom and dad have been such an integral part of this amazing organization.
So now I see why my sister wanted to go first and have me follow her. Not fair, not fair. I'm so honored to be here to say a few words to honor my parents. My parents' work with El Salvador, Central America, and CRISPAZ have played a large role in people inside and outside this room. And I'd like to speak a bit on how their advocacy and nonviolent work have influenced me. While my parents would visit Central America at least annually, starting when my sister and I were pretty young, even as kids, we understood it wasn't really a vacation, because obviously they would have taken us. It wasn't until they were more involved with the sanctuary movement that we started to understand better. Instead of Central America being more an abstract, far-off place, that work brought us in contact with Central American individuals and families who were so much like us, yet so different because of where they came from. Despite my awful Spanish, we became friends with those coming from Central America in this sanctuary movement. We helped sell artisania at church and protested at what always seemed like rainy and frozen rallies. And were reminded again and again the injustices so many experience, oftentimes because of the direct actions or inactions of our government. That work also introduced me to folks like so many of you, including the attorneys I think who are here, that put themselves between an overzealous sheriff, to put it mildly, and those escaping death squads arriving in buses downtown. I think this was one of my first introductions to how critical it was and is to use our knowledge, experience, and privilege to advocate for those who most need it. Additionally, they taught me the value of protests and healthy skepticism of the powerful who aren't always willing to help. As Francisco mentioned, CRISPAZ has a value of accompaniment, walking together with those who suffer from injustice. And this fits so well with my parents' work in El Salvador and in Central America. I lost my line, sorry. And this fits so well with my parents' work in El Salvador and Central America, where I first learned what the Jesuit Pedro Arrupe would call people for others. This accompaniment was demonstrated by walking with those in El Salvador, for example, and then sharing the stories of those they accompanied, whether with their children, family and friends, their churches, and those that might not otherwise have the opportunity to be part of a delegation, as I've been fortunate to be a part of. It was so critical that this people for others wasn't a one-way street. My parents shared their knowledge and compassion with Salvadorans, But even more, the Salvadorans shared their welcoming compassion with my parents and those that welcomed them. This accompaniment is especially critical at times like today, when we have what is at best an American-created migrant crisis at our borders, because we have not done sufficient accompaniment, not shown enough love, and we haven't empathized and walked with those experiencing injustice. My parents dedicated themselves to being people for others, accompanying those that needed it, and sharing that spirit with my sister and me, along with so many of you here. May the spirit that we share in honoring them inspire us all to do more needed accompaniment. Thank you.
This plaque that you see here is the Hinde CRISPAZ Peace Award. It was made in El Salvador, and it was made by artisans in a cooperative called Semilla de Dios, the Seed of God. So it was handmade, and it reads as follows. Christians for Peace in El Salvador, CRISPAZ, presents the 2023 Peter Hinde CRISPAZ Peace Award to Cathy, Cornell, and Paul for their commitment to nonviolent resistance in the accompaniment of the people of El Salvador. Cathy.
Let's all just take a moment and a breath. I don't know about you, but I'm so filled with emotion, joy, and love and care. Here in this gathering, it's just lovely. Thank you so much for coming.
It's really been a bit overwhelming just to meet so many old, dear friends, people who have been such an integral part of our lives. It's just so good to be with all of you. Thank you. Depths of our heart for being here. Grateful in so many ways.
And we're grateful not to just be among so many old and dear friends at our alma mater, Xavier,
but we're also grateful for the possibility of reviewing. Cathy and I sat down and to prepare these remarks. Remember Marion Hall, Jacqueline?
by Father Leo Klein, S.J. And we were invited, as many people were, to the Friends Meeting House here on Winding Way for an initial meeting to hear from two Salvadoran students from the University of El Salvador.
It was in February, wasn't
It was in February of '83. And we heard about the brutal oppression that had happened there, the attack on the university. And so those two young men were fleeing to Canada for safe haven there, and stopping in various communities in the States. How many of you were at that meeting in 1983? Okay.
of course.
Yeah. So that night, our minds and hearts were really open about the human rights, the lack of human rights and economic justice in El Salvador, how our government was supporting the government of El Salvador and its military. And we left the meeting feeling very shaken and also deeply committed to doing something. We had no idea what. We were just married and had 2 small children.
So it was in the fall of 1983 that we joined the Cincinnati Sanctuary Movement in welcoming a Salvadoran family. Father, Miguel, had received death threats because of his social work. So he came with his wife, Gabriela, and their 2 little daughters, Angelica and Margarita, who were just about the same ages as John and Moira, because you guys used to play together. And so we carried on with the sanctuary movement, and Bellarmine Chapel became part of a group of about 30 other congregations, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish also, in providing sanctuary for this group, and it was very public. You know, it was. We said these people are considered to be illegal here. We're welcoming them into their churches. So it was very important that we went public. And then in the fall of '85, Cathy took on the role of co-coordinator for the Cincinnati Sanctuary Coalition, together with Miguel. And we carried on our work.
Right. So this is an evening all about connection, I think. And the next part of the story is that Father Jim Brockman from here in Cincinnati was at our dinner table on Easter of 1984. And he said, you know, everybody seems to be going to Nicaragua, which is so important. People need to see what's happening in El Salvador because it's horrendous. And we said,
It's horrible.
well, Jim, is it safe? And he said, well, I can set up contacts for you. And so thanks to the Anglican Church of El Salvador and the contacts that Jim Brockman gave us, we went to El Salvador for our first time in 1985 with Mac Johnson and Nancy Sullivan, and began to learn firsthand by meeting people and hearing their stories.
And we led our first CRISPAZ delegation to El Salvador in 1986. And some of the people on that delegation might be familiar to some of you. Many of you are here tonight. Some of you.
I know they stand.
Tom Kunkel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom, you were with us. Mary Shane isn't here today, nor is Mark Brandenburg, but Joe and Mike Rush. Yeah, those are the lawyers that John referred to. It is common. Anyone else? And then Ren, yes, of course. Anyone else that we might be forgetting? Because then later in 1990, we did another delegation with some people from Xavier. Irene Hodson, you were there. Father Ben Ermston, known to many of you. And our dear, no longer with us, Angela Casanova, part of that 1990 delegation.
So we joined the board of CRISPAZ in 1987. And we're really pleased to see that it was an ecumenical board, very similar. It felt very similar to our work with the sanctuary movement here in Cincinnati and throughout the country. And we were Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and Buddhists on the CRISPAZ board. I became chair of the board the first time in 1989.
Then it was in May of 1987 that 2 FBI agents appeared on campus. I was talking about that with Mary Kay, who was in the office. And where were you at that time? Registrar. Anyway, the two agents went around to faculty and people in administration asking about Professor Knitter and what he was teaching. And he was working with some woman. And they just they told people that they had reason to believe that we were part of a terrorist movement. Yeah.
So it got into the local papers, and the FBI actually denied the story, which didn't work because we gave the Cincinnati Enquirer the business cards that they had left in their conversation with one of our Xavier faculty.
But it didn't make a paper. We still have them. Look at this. January 29th, 1988, FBI kept U.S. professor on campus. You know the story? And it got into, a few weeks later, into the New York Times. You know, again, revealing the duplicity of the FBI and how they were investigating not only us, but so many other religious groups that were going to El Salvador, coming back and telling people about what was going on there with the support of our government. So it was quite an experience. I remember they actually came, Moira was on your birthday, didn't it? Or Moira, she had both, yeah. I remember that occasion. So what we'd like to do now is just remember a few moments or situations in our experiences with CRISPAZ and in El Salvador that touched us in particular ways and kind of transformed us.
Perhaps one of the first ones was maybe with you, Mac, when we were there the first time. We were visiting an orphanage in La Libertad, I think run by the Cleveland Diocese. And the priest, the American priest there, told us that a little girl came up to him and, like, over the desk, peeked out and said, "Did the army kill your mommy too?"
Those kind of situations. And yet, we have memories, stirring memories of sitting together with base communities, the comunidades de base, and witnessing how these campesinos, these simple farmers, were reading the gospel, applying it to their situation, and drawing just incredible courage and hope in the midst of just awful situations of violence. It was really an example of what church can be.
And I think in that way really evangelized us to understand Christianity and the message of liberation in a way that we'd never really considered. The next thing that I wanted to mention took place in the Human Rights Office in El Salvador.
That was with Mac. That was our first visit.
Oh, okay. The Human Rights Office was kind of hidden in the second floor of the Pizza Boom restaurant in San Salvador. And you would go up those steps and there were tables, like those tables, with photo albums. Many, many, many photo albums, all filled with the pictures of people who had been disappeared and their bodies left along the side of the road. This was during the 80s. And those photo albums were so their family members could come and identify. They'd never find the body, but could come and have some closure about what happened to their loved one. So we met two young men that day who took those photos at great risk, but would go out and take the photos and assemble the books.
And then, I think it was about a year or so afterwards, I was on another visit to El Salvador, and I, with the help of CRISPAZ people, I kind of slipped my way into the Mariona prison. I was kind of posing as a businessman interested in purchasing artisania, works of art that the prisoners were making. We wanted to find out what was going on among the political prisoners. And so I got into the prison, and one of the first people I met were these two young men that we had met a year and a half earlier doing this work. They had been picked up and were now in prison. And what were they doing in prison? What did they show me? They were gathering information, and I remember it all laid out on charts on people who had been tortured in prison and how they were tortured, all written up. Wow. Carrying on that same work. And some months later, the information of what they smuggled it out somehow, it got into the National Catholic Reporter. It was reported. So again, one of those experiences of this tremendous courage and persistence.
And we share memories tonight of praying with Peter Hind and Betty Campbell, who were given this award in 2020. Praying with them at the tomb of Romero, and really feeling how Romero was alive and living on, and their commitment and their hope, and just the example and inspiration of the way they moved in the world and kind of plopped down wherever suffering was the greatest in Central America. And so they spent many years in El Salvador during some of the worst of the war. So with joy, though, to think of Peter and Betty and the way that they really guided the work of CRISPAZ for so many years as board members.
Another incident was we were on a delegation. I don't know if it was at the Xavier delegation when John, you joined us, but John Sobrino, you saw his picture, one of the leading liberation theologians in Latin America. Anyway, he came to talk to our group, and just at that time, Pope John Paul II had just appointed an arch-conservative Opus Dei bishop to succeed Archbishop Romero. And Sobrino was in tears. I mean, just at how the Pope could do such an insult. And yet, he just said, we got to carry on going. I mean, this is his commitment to carry on no matter what. The resistance at that time, it was very difficult for liberation theologian under John Paul II and then under Ratzinger, Bishop, what was his Pope's name? Boniface. No, Benedict. He's Ratzinger to me.
And another memory of really feeling helpless as two individuals in a foreign country, walking in the park downtown El Salvador and seeing the military haul two young men away from their families and put them in the back of a truck. And their wives crying for help. And just recognizing that in so many ways, there is so little we can do, but we must do something, right?
Yeah. And then I remember being again on a delegation. Ben Ermston was there. We were in the Rose Garden of the UCA, the Jesuit university where the 6 Jesuits and then the 2 women working with them had been murdered. And the Jesuit who was conducting the tour and explaining what went on, he said, and yet, and some neighbors on the other side of the wall reported hearing the Jesuits say some Latin prayer right before the gunshots rang out. And I knew immediately what that prayer was. It was the Suscipe. Suscipe me Domine. Suscite universum libertatem meam, macide memoriam, intellectum, receive, O Lord, my whole liberty, my memory, my intellect. I said that prayer every day in my seminary years, the Suscite. And it just hit me, the power of that, their example. I mean, what is it? It was just so moving. It was.
You still have that prayer on your desk.
Yeah.
So in so many ways, CRISPAZ has affected who we are as individuals and certainly as a couple. And we're so grateful for that.
I think it's helped us fulfill the wedding vows that we made in the Chapel of Marian Hall, where we vowed that our love for each other would enhance our love for others. CRISPAZ has enabled us to do that.
We're almost done. Yeah, but our shared experiences in El Salvador and with Salvadoran communities and individuals and our struggles together with them in some hard way to explain, but in a real way, has deepened our love and trust for one another.
And as we heard, and this was a surprise for Cathy and me, from our two kids, this CRISPAZ has well influenced their lives. Even though dragging you to those demonstrations but it paid off.
My work with CRISPAZ and the sanctuary movement, I realized later, eventually led me to change professions. I had started as a dental hygienist and ended up as a clinical social worker, and a very happy one.
Yeah, and the experience in El Salvador very much affected my goals as a theologian. I realized that my original and enduring commitment to trying to promote interreligious dialogue had to include somehow liberation theology's preferential option for the oppressed. And how to put those two together, interreligious dialogue and commitment to those who are oppressed, has been a major part of what I've been trying to do as a theologian in my later years.
So we've really enjoyed these last days, looking back over the years to prepare these comments for this evening. And in doing so, we asked ourselves a discomforting question. In light of the present situation in El Salvador and our country, but the situation of economic justice, injustice, and gang violence, in light of the United States' present immigration policy and foreign policy related to El Salvador, have CRISPAZ made any difference?
Well, that happened to be the same question that Cathy and I, quite inappropriately, asked of Reverend Maurice McCracken. Do you remember, many of you? When we visited him in the hospital room during the last weeks of his life. I don't know what moved me, but I looked at Mac and I said, Mac, after all these years of activism, your efforts to change government policies, do you think you made a difference? And he looked at us and he said, well, would you expect me to have been on the other side? Well, that's it. We carry on like that, simply because we must. Because it's what our values or our faith tell us we have to do.
And what our experience with CRISPAZ has made clear to us is that in order to carry on, we have to be doing so with others. We need each other. With others who are committed to seeking peace with justice through nonviolence, in whatever way we do it. in our day-to-day lives. CRISPAZ has been, for us, a beloved community that has enabled us to carry on and do our little part in this big world.
And for this, we are deeply grateful.
And honored.
Thank you very much.
My dear friends, has not this evening been a prayer? But I do pray. Ever-present source of all life, we offer our gratitude tonight for this community gathered, for the love and joy that is shared, for the witness of Cathy and Paul to promote peace and justice in our world. In this month of remembrance, we remember especially all of your family members, your friends, your loved ones who have gone before us, who have showed us how to love tenderly, to walk gently on this earth, to seek to be in right relationship with our Creator and with the people with whom we share our lives. At this very moment, may the people and nations of this earth not even hear the words disease, famine, war, or suffering, but rather may pure conduct, merit, wealth, and prosperity increase, and may supreme well-being and good fortune always arise. Thank you.
One last person, CRISPAZ staff member, Stanley DeVoe, is the development director in the United States, and really good to see you. And then after Stan, we're going to close with prayer. Katie's going to do that for us. Thank you.
So, first of all, a very big thank you to each present here this evening to celebrate Cathy and Paul and to celebrate the ongoing work of CRISPAZ. Thank you to staff, volunteers, and board members who have helped pull this event together. A big thank you to the President's Office and to the Center for Faith and Justice for making the use of this hall a possibility. Thank you to all of our sponsors. There were 22 sponsors this year, and do take a moment to look at the booklet. And in addition to the ads of the sponsors, and they're in categories of their level of support, we also had 22 organizations that placed ads with CRISPAZ for this event, and that's also in the booklet. As well, 16 individual donations were made in appreciation of Cathy and Paul's many years of peace efforts with the Salvadoran people. To finish, I want to ask you for your continued support of CRISPAZ's work. Just think of what can be done with a $100 donation. For example, during September of this year, CRISPAZ hosted for the first ever group of 8 Salvadoran young people who participated in a 4-day experience of learning and reflecting. They dove into topics such as causes of migration, history of El Salvador, and conflict resolution. We plan to continue this effort, but we can't do it without you. A $100 donation covers the food costs of one of these participants for 4 days. You can be an important part of helping a Salvadorian young person participate in a CRISPAZ delegation.